The door screamed when I forced it open. Metal grinding against metal, loud enough to echo down the empty street. Loud enough to make me freeze with my hand still wrapped around the key. For a second, I thought about turning around. About dragging my suitcase back to the car. About pretending this place didn't exist. About pretending I wasn't standing inside a condemned garage on my birthday, wearing funeral black and shaking like a teenager who'd just stolen her first car. Then my flashlight caught the chrome. And my heart stopped. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. Stopped. Because abandoned garages don't contain polished silver grills that gleam like jewelry. They don't smell faintly of leather and citrus polish instead of rot and oil. And they definitely don't hide the unmistakable silhouette of a hand-built classic car beneath a custom cover pulled tight with reverence. I whispered my husband's name without meaning to. What did you do? The beam trembled as I moved it higher. One car. Then another. Then a third. 3. Lined up like museum pieces. I staggered back against the doorframe, breath sharp, mind scrambling for logic. I had been left this garage. That much was certain. It was written in ink, read aloud in a quiet office, sealed with pitying looks and a smug smile from my only child. A garage. Not a home. Not security. A punchline. And yet here I was, staring at something that made my knees weaken. I laughed then. A broken, breathless laugh that startled me with how close it sounded to hysteria. Of course, I muttered. Of course you did. Because this ridiculous, impossible secret, was exactly like my husband. Careful, quiet, always 3 steps ahead, and always underestimated. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how a woman my age ended up sleeping on a leather sofa inside a fortified garage, clutching a suitcase full of grief and betrayal, wondering when exactly her life had been dismantled and rebuilt without her permission. It started earlier that morning, in a law office that smelled like polished wood and old confidence. My son sat beside me in a tailored suit that cost more than my first car. Perfect posture, perfect hair, grief worn lightly, like an accessory. I wore the same black dress I'd buried my husband in a few weeks earlier. The attorney, our family attorney for decades, kept adjusting his glasses, clearing his throat, avoiding my eyes. That should have been my first warning. He read the will. My son inherited the skyline, the penthouse, the accounts that came with boardroom status and cocktail party bragging rights. Then came my turn. A pause. A breath. To my wife, the attorney said carefully. I leave the property located on an industrial side street. The garage and its contents. Silence. A garage. My son's mouth twitched. Not grief. Not shock. Victory. His hand landed on my shoulder, squeezing just a bit too hard as he leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because something cold had already begun settling in my chest. That evening, he drove me home. Or what I thought was my home. The city lights glittered beneath the penthouse windows as he set my suitcase down by the door like an inconvenience he was finally done tolerating. "You'll need to find somewhere else to stay," he said casually. I laughed, because surely I'd misheard. Then he told me the penthouse was his now. That renovations were starting immediately. That I should be grateful he was giving me time to pack. And when I asked very quietly where he expected me to go, that's when he said it. The sentence that followed me all the way to that garage door. "You're just a useless old woman. What would you even do with a real inheritance?" Dad knew that. I left that night with my suitcase, my purse, and a single key the attorney had pressed into my palm. I drove until the city thinned out, and the buildings turned mean and quiet. Until I found myself standing in front of a rusted door that wasn't supposed to hold anything worth seeing. And yet, back in the garage, my hands shook as I stepped forward. I pulled the cover back. Silver flooded the room. Not dust. Not decay. Perfection. A restored classic so pristine it looked unreal. Like something borrowed from a dream my husband had never shared with me. I moved to the next car. Then the third. Each one documented. Preserved. Loved. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't spite. This was planning. And taped beside a light switch. Like he knew exactly where I'd stand when the truth hit me. Was an envelope. My name written in handwriting I would recognize anywhere. That was when I finally understood. The garage wasn't an insult. It was camouflage. And whatever my husband had done, whatever he'd hidden, whatever he'd seen coming, it was bigger than cars. Much bigger. The lights snapped on so suddenly I flinched. The garage flooded with bright, clean illumination. Nothing like the flickering bulb you'd expect in a place like this. Hidden panels glowed. Climate controls hummed softly. Security cameras blinked awake, like they'd been waiting for me. I stood there, blinking, heart racing. This wasn't a garage. This was a vault. My knees gave out and I sat hard on a leather bench bolted to the wall. The envelope still clutched in my hand like it might explode. His handwriting stared back at me. Careful. Familiar. Steady. I tore it open. My love. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've just walked into the lie I needed the world to believe. I laughed out loud. A sharp, incredulous sound that echoed off polished concrete. Oh, you are unbelievable, I muttered. My eyes burned as I kept reading. He apologized first. For the shock. For the secrecy. For the fact that I'd probably been humiliated before I ever made it to this door. Then came the truth. He'd known he was dying longer than he ever told me. Not weeks. Not months. Years. He wrote about doctors and timelines. About nights he lay awake watching me sleep. Wondering what would happen when he wasn't there to buffer me from our son's sharper edges. And then he wrote the sentence that made my breath hitch. I needed to know you would never be at his mercy. I swallowed hard. He'd seen it. The dismissive tone. The subtle corrections. The way my opinions became interruptions when our son grew successful. The way I was slowly repositioned from partner to background furniture. I had told myself I was imagining it. My husband had not. He explained the will. The split. The illusion. Our son got the visible wealth. The prestige. The thing people envy. I got the real assets. Assets hidden deliberately. Protected legally. Untouchable by anyone but me. My vision blurred when I reached the part about the cars. He described them not as trophies, but as anchors. Physical proof that value doesn't always announce itself loudly. That worth doesn't need permission. Then came the number. I stopped breathing. I read it again. Then again. I pressed the letter to my chest, dizzy. That can't be right. I whispered to the empty space. But he hadn't finished. Behind a photograph, one I recognized instantly, was a safe. He even reminded me of the combination. Like we were planning a weekend getaway instead of the rest of my life. Inside were documents. Properties. Accounts. Trusts. Cities I'd never lived in. Places he'd visited alone for conferences. Money that had been quietly working while I thought we were just comfortable. I sank back onto the bench, laughing and crying at the same time. Hours earlier, I had been thrown out like excess baggage. Now I was sitting inside a fortune wrapped in silence. And the cruelest irony? The man who'd told me I was useless was sleeping that night believing he'd won. I didn't sleep much. Shock does that to you. I wandered the garage like a museum after closing, touching nothing, afraid I'd wake up from it. Eventually, I found a small adjoining office. A couch. A bathroom. Fresh towels. Clothes in my size, tags still on. He'd planned for this. Of course he had. I slept there, surrounded by engines that probably cost more than the penthouse I'd been evicted from. The next morning, sunlight revealed what darkness had hidden. The garage exterior was ugly on purpose. Rusted signage. Cracked concrete. A decoy so convincing even I'd believed it. Inside was precision. Money. Intent. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the desk, staring at the phone. One number was circled on the letter. I called it. He answered immediately. He knew I would. We spoke for a long time. About the cars. About the rest. About what I should not do yet. Say nothing, he told me gently. Not until you're ready. Ready for what? He didn't answer that. That afternoon my phone rang. My son. I watched it buzz on the desk, the name flashing like a dare. When I answered, his voice wasn't concerned. It was irritated. Where are you? He demanded. You didn't go to your sister's place. I need you to pick up the rest of your things. I smiled. A slow, unfamiliar smile. I'm fine, I said. I found somewhere to stay. Silence. Then suspicion crept in. Well, you'll need to come by tomorrow. The designers are starting early. I agreed. Because by then, I understood something important. He thought the story was already written. He just didn't realize he was standing in the middle of the twist. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not out of politeness. Out of control. The building still looked the same from the outside. Glass, steel, confidence. But the moment the elevator doors opened, I felt it. The penthouse no longer belonged to me. The air was different. Colder. Stripped of softness. Furniture was gone. Photographs erased. The walls bore pale outlines where memories used to hang, like ghosts who hadn't realized they'd been evicted. My son barely looked up from his phone when he opened the door. You're late, he said automatically. I checked my watch. I'm early. He frowned, then waved me inside, already irritated by the correction. Boxes were stacked on my side of the bedroom like evidence. My side. The phrase felt strange now. Take what you want, he said. The rest is going to donation. I nodded calmly, which clearly unsettled him. He'd expected tears. Bargaining. Weakness. He didn't get it. I moved through the space slowly, deliberately. Touching objects the way one touches a body at a wake. Familiar, careful, saying goodbye properly. He hovered, glancing at the time, sighing dramatically. Can you hurry up? He snapped. It's just stuff. I looked at him then. Really looked. The sharp suit. The impatience. The way he said just stuff while standing in a home built on the quiet labor of two people who had once loved each other deeply. No, I said. It's not. He rolled his eyes and stalked out, muttering about calls and schedules. Good. Let him leave me alone. That's when I found the bag. Tucked deep in the closet. Old leather. Forgotten. Deliberately hidden. Inside was an envelope. My name again. I laughed softly. Always with the backups, I whispered. It contained copies of everything. Everything. Proof layered on proof. A man who trusted nothing to chance. Not even death. I slipped it into my purse just as my son returned. Irritation written across his face. You done yet? Yes. We didn't hug. We didn't argue. We didn't say goodbye. The doorman helped load my car like he always had. Only this time his eyes were apologetic. I drove away without looking back. That afternoon, I sat in a different office. Different energy. This woman listened. She didn't interrupt. Didn't rush. Didn't condescend. When she finally spoke, her words were calm and precise. Your husband built you a fortress, she said. And your son can't touch it. I felt something shift in my chest. Not revenge. Relief. I didn't answer my son's messages that night. Instead, I drove somewhere else. Somewhere my husband had bought without telling me. A small house by the coast. It smelled like salt and possibility. Inside were details chosen with terrifying accuracy. Colors I loved. Books I'd mentioned once years ago. A chair positioned perfectly for watching sunsets. I sat down and cried. Not from loss, but from being seen. That was when the knock came. A neighbor. A casserole. A name my husband had trusted. Another piece of the plan unfolding quietly around me. And somewhere, miles away, my son was growing uncomfortable. Because things didn't add up. Because people don't just disappear. Because garages don't hide secrets forever. I knew before he said it. I heard it in the pause on the phone. In the way his breathing changed. He didn't call to ask how I was doing. He called to confirm a suspicion. I went by the garage, he said, skipping pleasantries like they were unnecessary expenses. The one Dad left you. I stayed quiet. Let silence do the work. The door was locked, he continued. But the windows, well, they weren't exactly opaque. There it was. The moment the illusion cracked. And? I asked calmly, pouring myself tea. Another pause. Longer this time. There are cars in there, he said. Old ones. Restored. Expensive looking. I smiled into my cup. Yes, I said. There are. How many? His voice sharpened. Enough, I replied. That's when irritation gave way to calculation. I want to talk, he said. In person. Of course you do, I thought. He found the cottage 2 days later. Not because I told him. Because he hired someone. A private investigator. When he admitted it, casually like it was a reasonable thing to do, something inside me hardened permanently. He stood in my doorway like a man arriving to reclaim stolen property. Arms crossed. Eyes scanning. Measuring. So, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. This is where you've been hiding. I haven't been hiding, I said. I've been living. That annoyed him more than anger ever could. We sat at the table. He didn't ask if I wanted company. Didn't comment on the view. He went straight for the throat. How long did you know? He demanded. About the garage. About the cars. About all of it. I found out the same time you did, I said. After your father died. He scoffed. That's convenient. I held his gaze. So is your sudden concern for my well-being. That landed. Harder than shouting ever would have. He leaned back, jaw tight. Those cars are worth more than the penthouse. Yes, I said simply. And you were just going to keep that from me? I tilted my head. You threw me out of my home. He opened his mouth. Closed it. I pressed on. You called me useless. You told me I deserved nothing. Now you want transparency? His face flushed. This isn't about that, he snapped. This is about fairness. No, I said. This is about entitlement. The word cut deep. I'm his son, he said. I'm entitled to. You're entitled to exactly what he gave you, I interrupted. Nothing more. Silence slammed into the room. He stood abruptly, pacing. He tested me, he said bitterly. He set me up to fail. No, I said quietly. He gave you freedom to show who you were. That was when he broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But the anger cracked just enough to reveal something uglier underneath. Fear. My finances aren't what you think, he admitted. The renovations went sideways. An investment collapsed. I'm stretched thin. There it was. The real reason he'd come. Not guilt. Not reconciliation. Need. He stopped pacing and looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time since the funeral. I need help, he said. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. I folded my hands on the table. I know. The next day, I went back to the city. I walked through the penthouse. Or what was left of it. Exposed walls. Abandoned tools. Dust coating what used to be beautiful. My son arrived mid-inspection, looking smaller somehow. Less certain. This wasn't supposed to happen, he muttered. It always does, I replied. When image matters more than structure. We stood there, surrounded by the consequences of his choices. That's when I made my decision. I'll help you, I said. Hope flashed across his face. But not the way you want. The hope flickered. And not without conditions. He came back the next morning. Not storming this time. Not accusing. On time. Carefully dressed. Controlled. The version of my son he used when he needed something. We sat on the patio, the ocean breathing behind us like a witness. I've thought about what you said, he began. About help. About conditions. I waited. I don't have a lot of options, he admitted. The penthouse is bleeding money. Creditors are circling. If I don't stabilize things soon, I lose everything. I took a slow sip of tea. For the first time. I said, you're listening instead of talking. He didn't argue. Progress. I'll help, I said again. But you don't get a rescue. You get a rebuild. His jaw tightened. What does that mean? It means transparency. Every account. Every debt. No surprises. He nodded stiffly. It means professionals handle your finances. Not you. Not me. A pause. Then another nod. And it means you acknowledge what you did. To me. That one hurt. He looked away. I shouldn't have said those things, he said quietly. I shouldn't have treated you like Like you were disposable. The word landed between us. Heavy. I raised you better than that, I said. But I also enabled you longer than I should have. We both have work to do. He exhaled slowly. I'll do it, he said. All of it. I believed him. Not because he was convincing, but because he was tired. That's when people finally change. The penthouse was sold. Not flipped. Not glorified. Sold to fix what arrogance had broken. He moved into something smaller. Humbling. Livable. The trust stabilized his debts, paid off the worst damage, and most importantly, removed his ability to gamble with appearances. He hated that part. But he learned. Slowly. Unevenly. Honestly. As for the garage, I kept one car. The one that made me laugh the first time I drove it down the coast, hair whipping, heart light, feeling ridiculous and alive. The others were sold. Not quietly. Purposefully. The money funded financial education programs for women who'd been told, like me, that they were too old, too soft, too replaceable to matter. The rest went into a future trust. For children not yet born. Because legacy isn't about control. It's about direction. One evening, months later, my son stood beside me in the garage. Not pacing. Not calculating. Just standing. I didn't understand, he said. Why Dad did it this way. I rested my hand on the cool metal beside me. He wasn't punishing you, I said. He was protecting me. And challenging you. He nodded slowly. I failed at first. Yes, I said. You did. Then I smiled. But not permanently. That night, I drove home along the coast. My home. The house he'd prepared in silence. The life he'd safeguarded without asking permission. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet. The garage key rested in my palm. Once it had felt like rejection. Now I understood. It wasn't a door he left me. It was a mirror. And when I finally stepped through it, I saw the woman I'd forgotten I was. Not useless. Not invisible. Just underestimated. And that, it turns out, was my greatest advantage. Please click the subscribe button, like, share and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you, and see you in the next story.